and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. My name is Daryl Grove, and I'm joined by a man who never stutter steps and never puts his penalties over the bar. His name is Taylor Rockwell. Hello.
Hello. One of those things is true.
Which one have you done?
I try not to stutter step.
Yeah.
I've definitely missed a penalty or two before.
Over the bar?
I'm not sure. No, I think I've usually just had them saved or hit them wide.
Let the record show I was correct.
All right, you're right. I feel better as well.
So we are going to recap the second leg of the Concacaf Champions League Final, in which Toronto won 2-1 at Guadalajara, but lost on penalty kicks. We've also got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wonderful listener questions to answer today. I think we've got a good show in store.
You think we've got a good show?
Very confident in our ability to produce a good show today. So I think maybe before we get to the penalties, can we talk about what Toronto got right in this game? Specifically, what Toronto coach Greg Vanney got right in this game.
Yes. I feel like you're saying that because we're going to talk about him a little bit later. In terms of, I want him to coach the U.S. national team now.
Oh, really?
So we can have that now.
Okay.
I mean, I think so. I was very pleasantly surprised by what TFC were able to do.
Yes.
Because the report that came out, I think the day of this game, is that essentially Toronto had no healthy central defenders at all. You had, I think Drew Moore picked up a quad strain on Monday. Mavinga and Haglund were out with hamstring injuries. Zavaleta with a quad injury. Hernandez was not match fit, which meant that they had no center backs, so they went with Michael Bradley and Van der Veel as their two central defenders.
Both of whom have kind of played something resembling centre back at some point, right? Like Van der Veel is a right back or a right wing back, but I've seen him play right centre back for Toronto.
Okay.
So it's almost there. And then Michael Bradley, US fans will know, very often appears between two centre backs, right?
Yeah.
Sort of like a bald-headed Zach Galifianakis.
Yeah. Sure. He just pops up.
Yeah. And it kind of worked.
He's not as awkward when he does that, but yes, I think it did work. Matt Dole made the point that basically because Chivas' approach to these games has been man mark, that's what they're doing. They're man marking across the field.
We'll talk about Senor Perez in a minute.
Yes, we will.
And Senor Giovinco.
But they had in that first leg highlighted Michael Bradley as the key person to man mark at all times.
When he's in
Giovinco
midfield.
obviously too, but yeah, Michael Bradley because he's the one who does the transition from defense to attack.
Yep.
He links up play. He can play balls from deep. So they were trying to put numbers on him as much as possible. But if you move him to center back, you can still do that if you're Chivas, but now you have to send more numbers further forward, so you get a little bit more stretched. And that seems to be exactly what Greg Vanney was expecting. So tip of the hat to Matt Doyle for that one.
Tip of the hat to Greg Vanney as well, though, because it really did work in terms of, Michael Bradley was able to bring the ball out of the back under way less pressure than he would have been had he been playing central midfield, right?
Yeah.
What did we make of his defensive skills?
I mean, they were about what I expected.
Defensive performance.
They were about what I expected, I'll say. I think he did... See, defensive performance and defensive skills are two different things.
Okay.
Defensive performance, I thought, was better than I expected. I thought he did a good job of keeping everything organized, which I'm not surprised by.
Yeah.
I saw a lot of very good communication, consistent communication, both...
Some good loud pointing.
Yeah, both with the defense and also with the people in front of him and with Bono in goal. So I felt like he did a good job there. I think he did some good marking. There were still those moments where he would over pursue and then get beat, or under pursue and get beat.
I often think he over pursues and under commits.
Yes,
if that makes
that
sense.
Is very
or over
well
pursues
said.
and under tackles.
Yeah.
And
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah,
he seemed to want as well to let Van der Veel mark Pulido, who was the number. I think he was literally wearing number 9, right? He's the Guadalajara striker.
Correct.
Taylor checks team sheet and confirms. Then he'd be the one sort of shading this way and that and offering defensive cover here and there. He seems most comfortable doing that. And there's something in me because somewhat consistently on the show, I am an admirer of Michael Bradley's skills. I just wish he would sometimes be the guy that steps through people. He's my favourite when he does that.
I cannot remember who it was against, but it was in the final 5 or 10 minutes of the game, and he's basically sprinted out wide. Bradley has sprinted out wide, like right around where the 18-yard box meets the touchline, because he's running out to try to defend this one player, and he kind of wins the ball back, but then loses immediately to that same player. And it just felt in that moment like, yeah, you want Bradley to really stick that guy, knock him over, clear that ball upfield, and it's done. And he just sort of, I think he tries to do, again, it's this weird combination of like trying to do too much and not enough, that it's not just win the ball, play it out. It's like, I want to win it, but I want to win it in a way that I keep possession, but I turn it away from him.
Yes.
And so it's never really just winning it clean.
He tries to do math and use angles to figure out situations like his Bruce Banner, but sometimes you just want him to be the Hulk and smash someone.
There we go. Well said. Well said, Daryl Grove. It is going to be a good show. And so I think that is the only downside to having him as a defender, because there were moments in this game when I think I texted you and our friend Patrick to say, like, why have we not thought of this before? He always wants to drop in between the two center backs. Why not have him just go back there?
Think of it when they say, can the US play a back three? And then there's the thought of, well, you need one of those centre backs to be sort of that guy who wants the ball, is confident on the ball. I mean, maybe we could see Bradley doing this in the future. Klinsmann tried it with Jermaine Jones, right? And it was like 50% at
maybe
best.
He tried with the wrong one.
Successful, maybe Bradley could have done it.
Yes, but it's still worth noting that they were still able to score.
Yes,
Chivas, they scored the opener in this one.
Oh, should we talk about this then?
We should, because I think it is still like, it's basically when TFC don't do what they need to do in terms of playing against Chivas, who are man marking, just trying to win the ball back, and basically trying to win the ball back and then punish you for conceding possession. This is the one time that I feel like TFC really played right into Chivas' hands. So
this is the Pineda goal in the 18th minute. I'm going to say this starts with Josie Altidore.
Okay.
He receives the ball, tries to hold it up, and then lay it off to, I believe, Osorio. And I think Josie does it with the outside of his foot, and essentially plays it, instead of into Osorio's feet, plays it behind him. Then Osorio is in sort of a race or a chase with Pizarro. Osorio kind of also tries to think his way out of it. I think he tries to do like a weird receive the ball and roulette, or receive the ball and pirouette. I'm not sure which one. And Pizarro just says, nope, knocks him over, and
not so much.
And away we go, right? So I think Josie's slightly at fault for poor hold-up play there. But then I kind of felt like the Toronto FC back four, and I think the entire back four is facing Pizarro, Pineda, and a third Guadalajara attack. I don't know, but it was 3 versus 4. And nobody really aggressively stepped to the ball. They sort of backed off and just thought they could contain the situation. And Pineda made like a run around the side, and like it's almost like he got in the back door because everyone was watching the front door. And then he chips it over Bono.
And it did feel at times like Auro, who was playing as a right back in this one, it felt like he was the player who was most inclined to try to step to people, make those tackles,
make the hook play.
And he did on a couple occasions, sometime to the detriment of both the person he was tackling and himself, because I saw him down for a little bit on a couple of occasions, but also maybe a little bit overly aggressive at times. But when it's your right back trying to step to people, I feel like that's not necessarily ideal, as opposed to maybe one of those center backs stepping forward and trying to slow down that attack.
Maybe a problem with Bradley playing centre back is that someone's not just stepping hard. Or Sergio Ramos would have wrecked someone.
I would say maybe, but I would also say that yes, Sergio Ramos would have, but Sergio Ramos would do that because he's an experienced center back. If you don't have that, if you don't have any depth there, Toronto have depth, but all that depth was injured, then you've got to play some people who might not be as familiar. And when you aren't as familiar and you make a couple mistakes that play right into your opponent's hands, they tend to score.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, enough on the Guadalajara goal, because TFC pull it back pretty fast, right? Because you can blame Josie, maybe. I mean, I kind of do, for giving up that ball with the layoff. Josie equalises, I believe, 5 or 6 minutes later. Credit to Hassler, who lived up to his name. He hassled and hassled until he got that ball. Cuts it back. I don't know. I'm not sure how much movement Josie Altidore has done to be in this position, but he's definitely open, receives the ball, double nutmeg on the way to goal.
It is.
Deliberate double nutmeg?
No. I mean, I don't think so.
Are you sure? I want it to be true. I want it to be deliberate.
I mean, I think it doesn't, not to be contrarian, I don't know if it matters, because the point is that he picks a spot, he hits it hard, he keeps it low, and if you've got defenders scrambling, I think you kind of can't. I would say basically he's off the hook for me in terms of whether or not he meant to, because if he had tried to, then you're looking up and trying to find a spot and you've got a bunch of moving parts in front of you. Maybe you're taking a touch to try to figure things out, slowing it down, giving everybody an opportunity to get back into position. Whereas just hitting it low and believing in yourself to know where that spot is, that I guess is more important. But I think you're also right that Hassler, you've got to give him a ton of credit, because I feel like that is belief in the system and belief that, look, we can still fight back, because he doesn't really have any business winning that ball back, let alone being able to play it into an attacking space. And I think that if a team that went down 1-0 to Chivas having lost the first leg at home.
So 3-1 down at that point.
You could expect them to sort of be like, that's out. I'll drop back into my shape.
Well, speaking of, this is my favourite thing about this goal from Josie Altidore is after the ball's in the net. I think as they're making, I don't know if you spotted this or not, I feel like you do spot these things usually. As the ball is making its way back towards the centre circle for kickoff, Josie he points up. I believe it's got to be either at the scoreboard or the clock or both, and does the sort of the motion with the hand of everybody, come on, hurry up.
I did not see that.
Let's get on with it.
I mean, I saw them all very much like, let's do this.
Yeah.
But yes.
And I want to think Josie was saying that to the Guadalajara players. Like, get on with it. We're going to score on you again.
I mean, he talked to lots of other people in this game, including the medical staff, when they tried to cart Giovinco off. That did not go so well with the crowd. But yeah. So
I like Josie's sort of winning, let's get this back attitude. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I agree with you. And I also want to say, in regards to Josie Altidore, that he seems, with what happened in this game, it seems like the criticism is Michael Bradley, then maybe Josie Altidore, then maybe Marky Delgado or Jonathan Osorio, kind of underneath there, far below the two of them. And I feel like Josie Altidore especially, that's a bit unfair, because in that second half, it is Giovinco up top by himself, and it is Josie Altidore dropping in and working as hard as he possibly can to limit Chivas attacks.
I think that Toronto thing is really interesting, because the obvious thing would be for Josie to be the point person, the up highest, and then Giovinco operating underneath. And so often it's the other way around, with Altidore coming deep and connecting play, and then leaving Giovinco above him, like essentially closer to goal, which is how Toronto score their second goal.
It is, and I'll go with you there. We'll go back to Josie Altidore later, but that was such a good transition that we probably have to talk about Giovinco's goal. Yes.
We certainly do. I really like this goal.
All right.
I really like this goal, especially because he's being man-marked by Perez, like he has been in the previous 90 minutes. Man-marked the whole game. We talked about this, right? Perez always on him, always like hands and feet all over him.
Yep.
Even when Giovinco gets this ball, it's actually
occasionally knuckles. Yeah.
Yes, we'll talk about that, I think. He gets this ball from Marky Delgado, another surprise pass from Delgado.
Yep.
Like he uses the sort of unorthodox outside of the foot surprise pass to send Giovinco down into the channel. Perez is with Giovinco because he's with him the whole time, and he sort of squares him up. Perez thinks he's got him. Giovinco shapes like he's going to bend it to the far post. And I think Perez bites and the goalkeeper bites just enough that a tiny alleyway opens up into the near post. And Giovinco kind of, I want to say, like, punches it with his side foot inside the near post.
It's a forceful pass shot, but yes,
it is. I love it from Giovinco.
And it does that like bounce and then bounces off the back of the net in a way that's also is very appealing. So it just looks like this very matter of fact, like ping, 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 and it's in. And it looks very mechanical, but very pretty at the same time. Well done, Sebastian.
Signor Giovinco to you.
Yeah, okay, I'll take that.
Okay, how about the fact that this Perez Giovinco competition, which has been going on, like we said, across the whole two legs, certainly 100% definitely should have ended in about the 50, just before 60 minutes, when Perez definitely punches Giovinco in the stomach. I have no doubt. I've watched the replay multiple times. Straight up punches Giovinco in the stomach.
Oh yeah, the face I'm making is I'm trying to make like a morally safer joke of some kind. You said 60 minutes, so that's where my brain went with it. But yes, I'm back too. I mean, he obviously does. I tweeted out last night the clip that TFC themselves tweeted out.
Yes.
And it did look in that clip as though the referee had a very, maybe not clear view of it, but seemed to be looking at the two as they were scuffling and saw Giovinco go down. From the angle where the camera is, it looks like the referee's doing that, and it's also very obvious that there's been a punch thrown. So I think that maybe exacerbated my frustration.
Because that makes you think, oh, Concacaf, right?
And Daryl Grove, the calmer head, did some more viewing and figured some things out.
Yeah, so if you watch it live, then what's actually going on is Josie is down in the corner. I don't know if he's chasing a ball or trying to hold up a ball, but the referee is looking at Josie Altidore and a defender, which is sort of beyond Giovinco and Perez. So even though his head is sort of roughly facing in the same direction as the Giovinco Perez incident, it's his peripheral vision, right? His actual focus is beyond what's going on there, and it's on Josie Altidore, and I'm sorry, I don't know who the Guadalajara defender is, but that's what the ref is looking at. And then if you don't see it first time, then it doesn't matter how much Giovinco sort of, clutches his torso, and like he definitely made a noise, right, and rolled around, and no judgment on that because you just got punched. That's going to hurt. If the ref didn't see it and no one else saw it, there's nothing you can do in the moment, right?
No, I mean, because
maybe retroactively, but definitely not.
I would assume there will be some sort of retroactive punishment for that one. But I doubt Chivas will care.
But it does make a difference, because if it had been seen, then that would have been that final 30 minutes. Toronto would have had 11 men versus Chivas' 10 men,
and that would have made a massive difference, because then you have moments as the clock ticks by of Josie Altidore requesting a substitution. I think that was also for a hamstring issue, might have just been for fatigue or a combination of the two. And you wonder, if Chivas are down to 10 men, are Toronto exerting as much energy as they were? Can they play a little bit more of a contained possession game? And then maybe things go a different way again. I will say, just to round it out with Josie Altidore before we get to penalties, Again, he comes in for criticism for asking to be subbed, and I know there were a ton of jokes about how, like, oh, yeah, that's fitting that he wants to be subbed off before he's actually needed, and all of these jokes about missing penalties. But again, so many times in this game, I was like, why did Toronto have a guy who looks like Josie Altidore playing right back? Why do Toronto now have a guy who looks like Josie Altidore playing left back? Why is there suddenly a third center back who looks like Josie Altidore? He was all over the pitch in this game.
Yep. You mean in a good way?
Yes. I mean, all over in the sense that he did so much work that I think he will not get credited for. It won't show up in expected goals or key passes or anything like that. But it was hard work.
Expected right backing.
No, exactly. There should be, but there isn't. And it's hard work. And also, to bring it full circle, I guess, it's hard work born of a player who believes in what he's doing and who believes in what the coach has set out. And again, that is where I go back to Greg Vanney has sort of convinced me that he should definitely be in serious consideration for the U.S. national team job. Because if he can get his players to believe, even at 3-1 down on aggregate, hey, you guys can do this, and really getting everybody to buy in and do what has to be done to make the team succeed, that's the type of coach you want.
I agree. And yet...
But maybe get somebody in for penalties.
Right. Greg Vanney is not the CONCACAF Champions League winning coach. Matias Almeida is. Because Jonathan Osorio stutter-stepped. Did he hit the bar or have it saved? I can't remember.
He had it saved, I think. Okay. I can't remember. No, I mean, he might have hit the bar. Either way, don't stutter step.
Michael Bradley just put it over the bar. So I think we sort of have to talk about it. I'm not really sure what angle to talk about it from.
Well, first of all, I want to talk...
Actually, maybe a low angle.
I want to talk about... You said Delgado with another surprise pass. I would say we do have to add that Marky Delgado had a surprise miss right at the final, 5 seconds of time added on. He has an opportunity... Maybe 12 yards out, if that, top of the 12 yards out from goal, first time shot, skies it, and that is definitely one that he is going to be thinking about for a good long while.
He does score his penalty though, right?
I can't remember, but actually, I'm not sure I care. Because
he does, because I did that thing where you write down, I wrote the initials of where each person put it to see if there was any sort of pattern. Reveal, there was no pattern.
Okay.
The penalties went all over. Mikey Delgado kind of went straight down the middle and scored. So at least he kind of made up for it in the shootout.
I'm not sure.
Not entirely, right? It's not as good as scoring.
If you lose the shootout versus scoring the game winner in the final few seconds.
Well, so maybe here's the one thing I would say then is... I think, from what I've seen on Twitter, which is maybe not always the best place, but a lot of this has been about Michael Bradley. But at the same time, another midfielder, Mikey Delgado, who I'm a big admirer of, missed that chance at the end of the game. Jonathan Osorio missed his penalty, and Michael Bradley missed his penalty. And it's unfortunate that the moment is focused on Bradley. But if you're paying attention to the entire game, then it's not Michael Bradley messes up, Toronto lose. It's, three midfielders who've actually all done well in various different ways, have bad moments, and Toronto lose.
So then what do you...
I'm basically saying spread the blame around, don't focus it all on Michael Bradley.
Yes, I agree. But to play devil's advocate, so then what do you make of the argument or idea that Michael Bradley doesn't show up in those big moments where you want your captain, where you want your leader to be the one who takes charge, who makes sure that things go the right way? Do you think that
sounds to me like you're admitting only the devil would make such an argument?
I suppose I am. I guess what I'm admitting is that when he missed that penalty, I said...
That's my way of dodging answering. I'm willing to answer the question.
That's right. Well, no, but I would say, I mean, I guess it's fair to note that 90% of me when I went oh no, was or 10% of me was I felt bad for Michael Bradley. 90% was, oh really? This is just going to make it worse. This is going to make the anti-Bradley sentiment worse. And I do not subscribe to the belief that Michael Bradley is a bad player. So that's where I think I have to say devil's advocate.
I think he is the leader. He is the guy who will step up. And I think then you put yourself in the spotlight for things to go wrong. I think he keeps stepping up even when things go wrong. You know what I'm saying? So that it ends up being him. If he's not the guy who steps up, he literally would not have stepped up to take a penalty. You know what I'm saying? It'd be very easy to say, oh, that's not for me. I'm not taking penalties. Then it's someone else's fault. You know what I'm saying? So, I think just because you are occasionally involved in getting it wrong, the reason you're involved in getting it wrong is that you're brave enough to be the person who accepts the responsibility and says, I will do this. It's the same sort of thing of him playing as the only central midfielder in Bruce Arena's system, being willing to shoulder that responsibility. And sometimes it works in the second to last game against Panama. Sometimes it doesn't work in the final game against Trinidad. But he was willing to say, put the whole midfield on my shoulders. I'll try and make it work for you.
Yes. I would say I have
Side note, very bad penalty.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I've watched it about 30 times. I still can't figure out what he was doing.
Glutton for punishment.
I mean, well, I was trying. His form is so strange, and it's like his shooting foot doesn't really leave the ground, but ends up about like 5 yards in front of his plant foot. Or not 5 yards, that's way too much, but like a good 2 feet in front of his plant foot. And I can't figure out why, because his like body stays over the ball, but his hips go up. It's a very...
I feel like I'm not definite on this, but I feel like he's changed his mind at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe he was gonna like, bang it up the middle, or maybe even Panenka it the way that he doesn't follow through, or chip it in some way.
Yeah,
because it looks like he doesn't fully commit to doing one thing or the other.
Yeah, I think it's. I compare it to like there's the Bill Simmons line of like if you're thinking on the day of your wedding, like the worst thing that happens is we get divorced. Not a great way to start your marriage. And I think if you're starting your run-up being like, I wonder if I should go to the left or to the right with this one, that's not great either. Mm-hmm. If you're still deciding on the way up, and maybe there was just that brief moment of indecision when you want to just be thinking, bottom right corner, I'm hitting this hard.
Yep. Mm-hmm. All right. Anything else to say on this game?
No, I mean, other than that, I think I tend to side with the folks out there saying that this is a sign of growth for Major League Soccer teams. Not just this, but Red Bulls doing what they did in this competition. Maybe not so much FC Dallas. Get it together, guys. But Red Bulls and TFC. And you look at, I believe, Jonathan Osorio won the Golden Boot for a top scorer. He had 4 goals in this competition. And Sebastian Giovinco got the Golden Ball for best player in the tournament. So, I mean, you have those moments as well. Giovinco's Giovinco, so maybe that's an outlier. Mm-hmm. But it's still an MLS team coming as close as they could have come to winning the Champions League in the Champions League era. I think that is pretty impressive.
All right. I like the pedantic precision with which you said that to make sure it was accurate.
I try.
Yeah.
I try.
Because here's the next step is one day a Major League Soccer team will win the Concacaf Champions League. I'm sort of confident of that after seeing this year of the Champions League. And they'll go on to play in the Club World Cup.
Yep.
And that's when I will suddenly care a lot more about the Club World Cup.
Yeah.
Because the European team will probably still win it, and if not, the South American team will. But we will get to actually judge a Major League Soccer team against opposition from around the world in games that matter.
Yep.
We can say, is Major League Soccer better than the J-League? Right now, it's a theoretical comparison, right? You could maybe do an all-star game, or you could have a J-League team come in the summer and all that kind of stuff. Doesn't prove anything.
Nope.
But if an MLS team goes up against a J-League team in a Club World Cup game where there's actual sort of stakes, then we'll get to see what happens. And we'll get to see what happens when an MLS team goes up against, say, a Real Madrid. Yep. And we'll see, will it be 100-0 to Real Madrid? Will it be a tight game? Like, when it actually matters, we'll really have a yardstick we can use.
We will indeed.
But not this year.
2 final things I just want to say. One, I do think that Toronto, if you want to be critical of them, you could probably focus more on that first leg, where I do think they maybe didn't set themselves up in the best possible way to get the best possible result, and thus you have to get the result on the road in this game.
Mark on throw-ins.
Yep.
Jonathan Osorio. Yes.
And be ready for a big game, and kind of maybe expect your opponent to do some things that they were always going to do, like be physical and maybe take a few cheap shots and try to slow the game down and try to get in your head, and just be prepared for that.
I actually think a good example is the Bono save from Pulido in this game. Did you see this?
Which one?
Remember Pulido
Did a couple.
So Pulido scored that free kick in the first leg.
Yes,
I know. Maybe a cross, maybe a shot, and Bono was kind of unprepared for it, and he took the wrong angle, and he was like coming as if it was a cross, and the shot went in. The exact same free kick happened from the exact same spot, the exact same personnel. And this time he took the correct position and saved it. I think even that sort of encapsulates the growth of Toronto over the 2 legs, and maybe the growth that, if you really want to go with this sort of symbolism, the growth of Major League Soccer in the Concacaf Champions League.
I like it. I love
Can't
that
get
save.
caught out by Alan Pulido.
I love that save from Bono. Not like because it showed he learned from his mistakes, but it was also, there wasn't a reaction. Like if that were me, if you had chipped me, if we're just like messing around and you chipped me, and the next time you tried, I caught it, I'd be like, not this time. And just that he was like, yep, I made that save, back to business.
Yep.
Like it was just sort of like, oh, okay, he's learned,
right?
And he's moving on. But my final thing I wanted to say, and then we can move on, is that one more point I'm going to take from Matt Doyle, who I think summed up his like 3 thoughts or 3 takeaways from this game. Is, do you know what Toronto FC did before they won MLS Cup last season? The season before that?
No.
They lost MLS Cup.
Oh, sorry, yes, of course. Yes, I do remember
they lose MLS Cup, they learn from it. They win MLS Cup, they lose the Concacaf Champions League Final, they learn from it. Question mark is what I'm going to say.
So we should be supporting Toronto in the Voyageurs Cup or the Canadian Championship to get them back to the Concacaf Champions League.
Yeah, that works for me.
Yeah, all right. So we're officially Toronto fans in the Canadian Championship.
Sure? Question mark. Now we've ventured into murky territory. Let's get even to murkier territory with some listener questions, shall we?
Listener questions. Okay, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 listener questions today. I would like to start with Philip Gibson's question. Why are free kicks and corners called set pieces? But this is a thing that we just say.
Yep.
Commentators on the TV just say. Everybody just says a corner is a set piece. Free kick is a set piece. Why, Philip wants to know, why is it a set piece?
So you did some research into this, correct?
Yeah, I wouldn't say deep research, but I did some research.
So I basically
I have an internet connection.
Guessed as to why it's called a set piece in soccer, but then I also looked at where that term comes from, because I've heard set piece in a couple different formats.
Yes.
And I was wondering where it derives from. But I'm going to say for the soccer part, I'm going to say it's the only part of the game that is fixed or rigid, because you're restarting play when there's been an infraction or the ball's gone out of bounds.
You sound like you're reading that from somewhere.
I have it in my notes right here. I typed that out because I was trying to think of the way like set pieces are.
So you're not quoting somewhere else. So you're quoting your own notes.
I am. Yes. This is my it's like I tried to write it out as officially as possible because I was trying to think of when you have a set piece and it's a restart, but not necessarily always a restart when it's gone out of bounds, because you can have a free kick. So after an infraction as well. There we go. I tried to be official with it.
So you're right, I think. It's like things are set.
Okay.
Right? Set. The word piece is the weird part to me.
Well, this is where I think. This is where I did a little bit of the history search, and from what I found, at least one of the earliest usages comes from the 1920s and relates to World War I, when you had set piece battles. So I guess prior to that, you would have these kind of large scale skirmishes in like the Napoleonic era, where you had smaller armies that were like more from like the landed aristocracy. You didn't have a lot of the people from all over the country coming together and fighting in an army. And so once you get the larger armies, it requires a lot more organization and knowing exactly who's going where and who's doing what at every single moment. And it requires much more of a set piece battle. There we essentially go. Where that comes from.
So the rough definition...
Carefully planned and executed military operations.
That's the word is carefully, or the phrase is carefully planned. A set piece is anything that is carefully planned. So as you said, it's about like a military sort of strategy that you execute, right? That's your set piece, that we're going to do this pincer movement. Maybe some Game of Thrones characters, you have to explain it more obviously to them.
From the sides.
Right. But the other place you hear this a lot is in theatre. If you have sort of a very complicated thing on stage, it's a set piece, right? Maybe when you use the ropes to like lift people up, right? Or in film. The big thing is in film production, a set piece is a sort of... a big scene that is very complicated and has to be carefully planned. A good example of a set piece, in my opinion, the Goodfellas tracking shot going into the restaurant. That's a set piece because everything has to be carefully planned and set up, and it all has to go right before they can say, yes, cut and print.
I forget what it was that I think it was Ray Liotta messed something up like 3 times in that one. Like they would almost get it done, and then Ray Liotta would laugh or say something.
He was offside.
Yeah, that could be it. Yes.
Other examples. The other example is the Ride of the Valkyries scene in Apocalypse. This is one I read in Apocalypse Now. The Ride of the Valkyries scene with the helicopters.
Yeah.
That's a set piece. It's like a big, expensive thing where everything has to go right.
All of Mad Max Fury Road is essentially a big budget set piece.
Fury Road. Yeah. And then the idea being, obviously, if you haven't made the connection in your head yet, I'm guessing most of our listeners have. If you transpose this over to a corner kick or a free kick, we've talked so much about, like, there'll be a thing like for Liverpool in the Champions League semi-final, they will make sure that Sadio Mane screens Daniele De Rossi, and then Lovren drifts to the far post, and then Virgil van Dijk is at the near post, so maybe he can head it back over. Just all carefully planned and executed.
Yeah, so it's basically like you can have tactical preparation for the game, and like if Michael Bradley gets the ball, then you need to make this run.
Yeah.
But you can't have those sort of NFL style, when he does this, you do this, and then he goes there, and then that means this. Whereas you can have that with those set pieces. Is
it like every NFL down is kind of a set piece?
Yeah, basically.
Because it's drawn up in the playbook, and then you try and execute it the best you can.
There we go.
Ooh, I like it.
Look at you learning stuff about football.
I mean, just noticing stuff. All right, we got 4 more questions.
We do.
But we also have a returning advertiser. Today's show is sponsored by Away Days. Away Days Football is the independent football clothing brand.
Yep.
Not makers of, but providers of the wonderful mystery kits that are so popular. They're so very popular. So mystery kits are exactly what they sound like, Taylor. This is where you buy a mystery kit from awaydaysfootball.com. You guess what type of jersey you get?
A mystery?
You don't know because it's a mystery. Yes, you get sent a jersey that could be from anywhere in the wide world of soccer.
But I think one of my favorite things about this, I'm not sure they'll love this, so this is on the fly. We'll see how it goes.
They use away days football.
Yes. Yeah. Is that it seems like a lot of their mystery kits end up having relevance in a variety of ways. So I saw
unintended relevance.
Well, I saw like a bunch of people getting Sheffield United jerseys.
Yes.
And then that was when CCV ended up, so that was before CCV signed there briefly. So it was like, oh, that's pretty awesome. And the other one was, I saw a couple of people tweeting out PAOK jerseys, the Greek side, who then I think a couple months ago were the ones where their owner went on the field with a gun. So you have those moments of like, oh yeah, that's how I know that team. So you just have like, maybe sometimes you get linked to a crazy owner. But
we're saying away days football can predict the future.
Basically.
It seems like, right? If you get a jersey from away days football, check the news for that team because they're about to do something. They're either going to sign an American or something crazy is going to happen.
But I have a feeling, I know there is like a term for this and I forget what it is, but it's like once you're aware of something, you see how often it occurs.
Yes.
And I do wonder if just lots of different teams have lots of different crazy things happen, but once you're paying attention to that random Greek or Finnish or whatever team, you start to see like, oh, whoa, their owner's insane.
So here's the other update from Away Days Football. They now offer mystery kits for kids.
All right.
So mystery kits for kids. It's the same concept that you don't know what it's going to be, but it's in kids' size. Here's what I like the most about this. When you click on this on the awaydaysfootball.com website, with a lot of asterisks and capital letters, it makes very clear this is for kids. It comes in junior sizes to make sure that no adult accidentally orders it.
That's good.
Yeah, because I feel like it seems like a lot of people accidentally order youth sizes without realizing it.
Or maybe just think they're slightly smaller than they are.
It's a good example of Away Days Football.
$20.
looking out for customers. You should also note Away Days Football has that great logo. It's a soccer ball and a globe, and they make their own sort of independent clothing as well. T-shirts, hoodies, caps, all that stuff. There's actually a really nice stadium T-shirt that I especially like. So thank you to Away Days Football for sponsoring today's show. And listeners, you can use a discount code to get some money off.
What might that discount code be, my friend?
The discount code might be, it definitely is, TSS for 15% off anything at awaydaysfootball.com. The link will be in the show notes. If you shop with Away Days Football, you'll be supporting us because you'll be supporting a sponsor, but you'll also be supporting a sort of American company that's making independent soccer apparel.
There we are. So thank you to Away Days for sponsoring today's program. Now let's get back to some listener questions, starting with Ben Helford, who asks, in the highly likely event that you two are hired as co-managers for Arsenal, how do you fix the team next season?
So the important thing is we're going to have to agree on this. Otherwise, just the first thing in the British press will be new Arsenal co-managers at war.
I mean, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah? All right. So my idea is the obvious
Oh, no, I meant
one.
It's fine that we're at war.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, go ahead.
the press Daily Mail would love it. It's an obvious idea that I think Arsenal fans have been calling out for a long time. But I think just because it's obvious doesn't mean it's wrong. They need a combative defensive midfielder.
Yep.
They need a mean guy to play central defensive midfield and make it hard on the opposition. I think it's been too long of Arsenal having these sort of passers and creative types playing sort of deep-lying midfielder. I think Granit Xhaka is a good example of the player Wenger signed to play defensive midfield or holding midfield. When what they really needed, because they're not the best team in England, they can't just expect to have the ball the whole time and everything goes their way. They need an enforcer. That's what I would sign for Arsenal. I would sign that guy, the Javi Martinez guy, the Casemiro guy, the guy who's going to sit at the base of midfield, punch anyone in the mouth if they come through at him, and let everybody else do their pass thing.
I would say I would add Frank the Tank to that one, Frank Kessié, if you want to go for like a maybe slightly more cost-effective option, although I'm not sure what Gattuso will try to sell him for. But I'm with you because, and I think you can have, I do think you can kind of have both. I would say Nemanja Matic is maybe an example of that player who can play the ball and can score a goal occasionally, but can also break a leg if need be. You know what I mean? Like, can also be that very physical destroyer in the middle if you need them to be that.
Maybe Kovacic would be a good shout, like someone who's not getting starting minutes at Real Madrid.
I can't claim to be as familiar with Kovacic enough to say one way or the other.
I mean, I know that he's a very good defensive midfielder in terms of like intercepting the ball, that kind of stuff. But I don't know how tough he is. I'm sort of making an assumption that he's tougher than any other Arsenal midfielder right now.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's fair. I think I would also add that, like, I took this in two ways. One, I took it as like us actually managing, which would be laughable. But I think I would say with that in mind, I would not prioritize getting back into the top 4 right away, because I think that sets you up. I would not say, like, we're getting into the top 4 this season. That is absolutely our goal. Obviously, you're going to get a bunch of questions, and eventually you're going to have to say that. But I think if you do that, you're automatically putting a target on your back. Now, you could say you're taking over Arsenal. Like, that should... It's one of the biggest clubs in England. You should always be qualifying for the Champions League. That should always be a priority. But I think sometimes if you're prioritizing that we've got to finish top 4, if that becomes your obsession, maybe you're not necessarily building yourself out in the most productive of ways.
It's going to be tough for the next guy because it seems to me that the new manager or managers will probably have instructions from the board, get back into the top 4. I wouldn't be surprised if you have a contract that says, here's a 3-year contract, but if you don't make the Champions League, we can sort of let you go. Similar to what Man United did to David Moyes, right? You remember they sort of fired him the day after Man United mathematically could not make the Champions League.
Yep.
So I think it will be a priority for Arsenal in that way.
Oh, no, I'm sure it will be a priority. What I'm saying is that if you're the manager and I say to you, Daryl, are we making top 4 next year? And you say, yep, that's happening. You're going to have some people who say, well, that's unrealistic, and then are going to be waiting for you to fail to criticize you. You're going to have some people who think, why are we only going for top 4? We're Arsenal. We should be challenging for the title. Like, you're never going to make everybody happy if you're prioritizing what I would say are sort of nebulous goals. Like, top 4 is great. You get into Champions League. But I would say more so to going back to your initial point, to bring in 1 or 2 players that really exemplify the way you're going to want this team to operate. So say you want to have that destroyer who clogs up the middle and causes problems, but then you want an Alexis Sanchez type who can break down the line and cause problems there. Then you go out and you find that one winger and you spend your money in 1 or 2 spots to I know Alexis Sanchez is a bad example, but you spend your money in 1 or 2, maybe 3 spots to really strengthen in a way that is an obvious sign of this is what we're doing.
Yes.
And the person who I think is the best example of that, and this is where I took it in a different direction.
You have a player here?
No, I have more so what I think Arsenal should actually do in terms of who they should actually hire. And it's not him, because it's not going to happen, but I think about what Liverpool did when they hired Jurgen Klopp, that it wasn't, we've got to be in top 4 right away. Obviously, that was something that they were targeting, but it was more about him. I remember the first game he took over, and we could see those little moments with Liverpool of like, ooh, they're hunting in packs now. Ooh, there's 3 guys doing the gegenpressing. You can see that here and there. And now you watch them play, and everybody's in on the system. They've brought in the players that exemplify that system, can execute the system, and they are where they are. And I think if you're Arsenal, if you bring in somebody who has that vision for how they want to play, and you give them 1 or 2 players that signify right off the bat, this is how we're playing, then it tells everybody who's already there, this is what we need to be doing, this is how I need to improve or perform to be in this squad. But it also very clearly shows the board, okay, this is who we need to be looking for, the other players that we need to use to strengthen.
So you're saying that because we're saying we're going to be a tougher team, signing that badass defensive midfielder would be our signifier of this is what we're doing.
Exactly. Yeah. And then when that player gets injured in the 3rd game, then we're in trouble. But
get 2 of them.
Yeah, right? But I think I just like, not that it hasn't been as good as they would have liked. It hasn't been terrible. But I think about Milan, where they went out and signed, I believe, 56 players last summer. I don't necessarily know if that approach is the best, because if you're just bringing in a ton of people...
There's a core of a great team at Arsenal. That's why I sort of disagree with your top 4 thing, because if I was the Arsenal coach, I'd be saying, to even like, you want to go one better than Wenger settled for recently, you want to say, I'm going to go top 3, top 2, top 1, as Brian Clough said.
It's just, I think I just have a hard time with that idea of like, we're going to get top 4. Like, if that's your goal from the outset.
But isn't that the problem under Wenger towards the end, was sort of that settling for top 4 seemed what was good enough, and that maybe sights should be set higher?
Yeah, but I don't think that that's possible. What I'm saying is I don't think you can say...
You know what you're getting at here, actually, is there's going to be a problem in the Premier League going forward where there are 6 teams that expect to finish in the top 4 and go to the Champions League.
Yeah.
It's a huge... Because right now, is it what, Chelsea and Arsenal are outside the top 4? Those are teams in years past you would almost guarantee that they would make it.
Yeah.
There are going to be 2 teams disappointed every single year.
That's a really good point.
In the Premier League. It's going to be rough.
Because I keep hearing people talk about, like, is it a problem that we've got this big 6 now? And it's like, no, we had the big 4 like 5 years ago. But that is the difference, right? Is that it was a big 4 when there were 4 spots. Now there's a big 6, and there are 4 spots. So maybe that's what we should do. Our first job as Arsenal co-managers should be to petition UEFA to get England 6 spots in the Champions League, and then we're good.
Okay, let's move on to a question from Ira Jersey. Ira says, there's a lot of statistics available for matches on the personal and team level. Yep. We agree. I'm wondering, what statistics do you think are the most overrated, like maybe possession, suggests Ira, underrated, like packing stats, or not available that you'd like to see, maybe such as MLS assists, meaning the secondary assist.
All right. So
it's essentially 3 questions, like A, B, C.
All right, I'm not going to do my usual thing. I'm going to actually try to answer this. I'm not going to go all the way around. I'm going to say the things that I think are overrated. It's a minor one. I don't like ball recoveries, as we've learned in the past. That just means Daryl put in a really great tackle and the ball was loose and I ran in and took the ball. That's a ball recovery. That doesn't mean I did anything. It just means like I was the one who was following up and happened to be there when Daryl made a really good defensive play.
Interesting.
That doesn't always speak volumes to me. The other one that I really have started to be annoyed by, and I think it was maybe not trying to, fire shots anywhere, but maybe it was the announcers last night, is shots. I really do not like that.
Announcers on the Toronto game for Go 90.
Because
just to name names.
Because Chivas, thank you. Because Chivas they did keep getting shooting opportunities, especially in the second half. But the commentators were treating them as though Toronto FC are on the ropes and they're barely hanging on. Yes, Chivas had a couple chances that were very clear-cut chances. But a lot of times it was them not having anything and shooting from 25 yards out. But because it was a shot, the announcers see it as a save, and thus, they're peppering the goal. But it's like, no, that's what Toronto want them to do. Mm-hmm. And so I think sometimes you'll see they had 26 shots on target or 26 shots, whatever, in this game. That can mean that the other team is actually executing the game plan they're trying to execute. And that's where I think shots can be
to make you shoot from 40 yards,
for
example.
Exactly. That can be a little bit overrated in terms of telling you what happened in the game.
Okay. So so you've done overrated?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll answer and do my overrated. We'll
Sure.
do it that way, okay? So first of all, I don't think possession is overrated.
I agree.
I think it's the obvious one to think is overrated, but it's only overrated if you are looking to it to prove who was the better team and who deserved to win.
I think it is
Fair?
only – I would say that. I would say it's overrated if you're reading a match report by a lazy match reporter.
Right, because if you say that, I'm really going to pick a team at random, so I don't want to offend anyone. If we say...
I can do one for you right now. If you say the Dutch, I have it in there, the Dutch in 2014 only had 36% or whatever, which means they were clearly dominated by this Spanish team that was far superior to them.
There we go. So yeah, if you say Spain had 74% possession, 64% possession, and yet somehow they lost, then you're doing it wrong, right? Because you're not thinking about what's actually happening in that game. But if you say Spain had 64% possession, if you tell me that, I know that they kept the ball for the majority of the time, and they were moving it around, and then you know it's a good stat because it actually tells you what's happening in the game. It's only a bad stat when you use it to say this team deserved to win or this team deserved to lose. Yeah, okay. But an actually overrated stat, I would say, is passes between central defenders.
Yep.
You can look at central defenders' passing stats, and they could have like 80 of 80 passes completed, right?
I think you burned me once with this when we were doing specific predictions because I didn't recognize that at the time, and you're like, I think the center backs. I was like, the center backs? They're not. And yes, they always complete the most passes.
They almost always, right? Unless there's some central midfielder who's absolutely dominating and the team is dominating.
Yeah, that's
right?
the only one, yeah.
But sometimes, there's two different versions. Sometimes those passes just go to the other centre back and back and back and back and back, and they're lateral forever and you don't go anywhere. Sometimes it's a centre back bringing the ball forward and passing the ball into the next phase of play, right? Into the midfield or into the attack. And those are two very different things. So I feel like overrated is just passes completed by a defender. But if you could tweak it and have passes sideways and passes forward, then it would suddenly become a very useful stat.
Yes.
All right. Underrated.
Yep.
What do you think is an underrated stat?
I think underrated... This might not be underrated, but to me it's underrated because so many mainstream people still don't seem to like it, and that's expected goals.
Yes!
That's a big one that I've come around on.
I think so too. It's weirdly underrated because it got a lot of hype from statisticians and football analysts and people who take this stuff very seriously, and then it seems to be laughed at / misunderstood. I'm going to say misunderstood and then laughed at by sort of more mainstream pundits and coaches who don't really know what they're dealing with.
Yes.
Fair?
And that's I think it always goes back to pundits for me. I forget who it was who was making this argument that like you hear pundits all the time be like, oh, he's got to be finishing that. Oh, he should be finishing that. And don't recognize that expected goals actually tells you whether or not he should be finishing that,
right?
Which then tells you like, oh, that's actually a low percentage chance. So maybe it's a little bit more forgivable. I really enjoy that aspect. But I also sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say I actually think the problem is expected goals is in a way that happens with a lot of sort of statty stuff is maybe branded not particularly well. Like it should have been just called percentage chance or something like that. But because it's XG and expected goals, then it for some reason the branding opens it up for people to say, oh, expected goals. You know what I mean? Like, I expected some. You know what I mean? It makes it easy for people to sneer if they don't understand.
Yeah. But I think also if you look at, for example, Man City last season had, I think it was like expected goals against had the worst number. In terms of how many goals they conceded versus how many they should have conceded. They conceded some, I can't remember what the exact number was. I probably should have written it down. But it indicated, there is some problem that it means they're conceding too many goals. That was last season. This season, they do not have that problem. And I would argue it's because they went out and got new outside backs and they got a new goalkeeper. And that was a huge part of why I think they were conceding more than they should have. So if you look at it from that perspective, expected goals or expected anything can inform what a team is doing wrong and how it can be fixed.
Okay, so I agree with you on that being an underrated stat. But I would also say, weirdly, ball recovery is an underrated stat.
Get out of here.
I really mean it. Mostly because I think it gets overlooked because when you see defensive midfielder stats quoted, it's normally he had this many tackles, this many interceptions, and then they won't include ball recoveries. And I actually think ball recoveries is quite important because in the same way that you can't just say, a striker was lucky to be in the right place at the right time, I think reading the play of being aware of when a ball might pop loose or there might be a chance to collect a ball is a skill, and I think it should be valued.
I don't disagree that it should be valued. I think it's one of those stats that you assume will be higher on an individual level than it actually is. So it's ball recoveries. Every player probably has like 10 of those a game. And really, I feel like it's usually much closer to like 6 ball recoveries.
Yep.
And so then when it's Daryl Grove has a great game and gets 6, but me, Taylor Rockwell, who's his midfield partner, who happens to benefit from his hard work, I got 2 because Daryl made some good tackles. That's, I think, where I get frustrated is I think it's one of those stats that can be used to say something that maybe isn't necessarily there. So we can say Taylor had a great game. He had 2 ball recoveries. Daryl Grove only had 6 or whatever. And like that makes it seem like, 2, 6. It's not that far off if you're expecting it to be, this guy had 15.
So maybe it should. I always think it should be combined with interceptions in some weird way because they're so similar. And they are different events, but I feel like maybe it should be reported combined. You know what I'm saying?
Didn't you used to do with your specific predictions for 2014, which we will be doing for 2018? Didn't you used to do like total defensive actions?
Yes, that's what I did. Yeah, defensive gathering tackles, ball recoveries,
aerial duels,
interceptions.
I think.
Aerial duels as well. Yeah, defensive actions.
Yep.
So I'd agree with Ira. Packing stats, which is how many players you beat with a pass, basically. It's not underrated. People who know it think it's useful. Yep. But it's underreported.
Yep.
It's not used in the mainstream yet. When it gets to the mainstream, it will no longer be underrated.
Agreed.
Fair? Mm-hmm. Okay, now my favourite part. Stats that aren't available that you'd like to see.
I mean, I think I already hit the nail on the head. The one that I've really come around to, and I think it should be called this the world over, even though some leagues already have it, is the MLS assist. Because
so the pass before the pass.
It's a thing that I used to think was so silly. And now the more I think about it, I'll put you in the favorable light. If Daryl Grove gets the ball, makes a 70-yard run down the channel, gets past 3 people in the process, and then makes a great pass to me, splitting 2 defenders, and then I lay it off to the forward who shoots and scores, I get the assist. You don't get that statistical.
It's okay. I'm not in it for the glory, though. It's fine.
Yeah, but some people are, and some people should be. And there is also an element of productivity that if you're a midfield creator and you are constantly getting that MLS or second assist, but it's not showing up, then there are those people who are going to be like, he had a terrible season. He didn't have any assists. He had 4 assists. He should have had way more.
And the weird thing is MLS does track it. Other leagues do not. So that's what we want is MLS assists exported to Europe. Right? Yeah. I'd love to see the Champions League MLS assists.
Yes.
Yeah. They have key pass, but I'm not sure it's quite the same thing. Because key pass is like an assist that wasn't converted, usually. Okay, I've got some fun ones that I would genuinely like to see. I would love to see the stats on stepovers. Okay. I'd love to see how many stepovers a player does a game, or nutmegs, or basically I think to rehabilitate the image of statisticians and soccer stats, we should have some more fun ones that people could use.
All right, with that in mind, the one really random one...
Nutmegs, stepovers, back heels, all that stuff. It's quite easy to record because it's obvious when it happens. I would just want to see the numbers. Then we would know who has the most... it's obviously Dele Alli, but who has the most nutmegs in a season? You would have the numbers on it.
So we're talking about like ones that would be a little bit more fun and used in a different way.
Yeah.
I would say like tracking equipment changes in a game would be pretty interesting because I would like to know which players went off at halftime and changed their footwear. That maybe they thought like, these studs aren't right for this surface or whatever, or they needed to, whatever the issue might be. I wouldn't mind knowing that just to see like, 8 of Tottenham's players had to change their studs. That means there was either something wrong with the field or they're not doing something performance-wise that they need to be doing.
I would also like to see didn't step for offside. So anytime there's a player who doesn't step for offside when the rest of his team does, and even if the attacker doesn't score, but it just creates a chance, kept someone on side.
I was going to say the kept on side. But
kept someone on side.
The only one is
a stat I would track.
That could easily be like unfair, I think. But I guess in the few instances when it would be unfair.
If 3 defenders step and the fourth one doesn't, that defender's done it wrong. There's very little room for argument.
I just wait for the player who gets injured and is down on the floor and everybody else runs out.
You gotta eat that.
You gotta deal with it.
You gotta eat that.
All right.
Well, there's nothing else I would have. I don't think. Maybe forced backwards. I wrote this one down because I was interested in it. If you apply defensive pressure, but you don't win the ball, so it's not like a tackle, you don't make an interception, you don't make a ball recovery, but you force an attacker to turn around and play the ball backwards, which is essentially the attacker admitting there's no way forward here. I would like to see that stat recorded.
Okay.
Forced a player backwards.
Forced a player backwards.
I'll end there. I feel like I've suddenly got millions I could...
I think we could keep going. And I'm looking at the clock and thinking maybe we shouldn't, but maybe we should talk about our other sponsor on today's episode, Roughneck Scarves.
It's a classic Total Soccer Show sponsor, Roughneck Scarves. If you don't know about them by now, you will never, never, never know them.
Except when I tell you that they are the official scarf provider of the U.S. national team, of U.S. soccer, of Major League Soccer, USL, and the NCAA.
And you can also find all kinds of national team scarves, other national teams, non-US national teams, at roughneckscarves.com, as well as all kinds of club teams as well.
And you can make custom scarves. We have the TSS custom scarf. And we asked if you were to design a custom Roughneck scarf to represent this week in the UEFA and Concacaf Champions Leagues, what would it look like?
We got lots of great responses. We chose our 3 favourites. A lot of stuff about balls going over bars. Eric Freeman says his scarf would say, "Aim here," in very big and bright letters, and it would be given only to fans sitting directly behind the net during penalties.
So I love that idea. I think it was when UVA lost to St. Louis way back when in the College Cup in the mid-early 90s. And I remember the UVA...
Before my time in the United States.
It was when the UVA pet band still existed before they were disbanded. But I remember them sitting behind the goal, and every time somebody would have a shot, they would pull out cards, giant yellow cards, and wave them back and forth. And I think they were banned from the competition after that. Wow. So that might be the only downside to Eric Freeman's idea.
Were they disbanded for reasons we can talk about? What happened?
They were a little rowdy.
Okay.
They did some things. They did a tribute to West Virginia once that was not appreciated, amongst other things. But I think it was also UVA wanted a more, normal is the wrong word, but a more presentable band for the world. I missed the pet band, I'll say that. John Adams says side 1, Mohamed Salah and CR7, Cristiano Ronaldo, about to collide. And then John Adams didn't have anything for side 2.
He did. It said, John Adams said on side 2, 13 consecutive Mexican flags. So I haven't checked the stats, but I assume that a Mexican team has won the CCL 13 times in a row.
David Wacker on one side, Bradley's penalty halfway to the moon, and on the other, a massive Liga MX logo standing atop a small MLS logo. David includes a sad face.
I can't tell if the sad face is intended to be on the scarf, or it's just David expressing his emotions.
I think it should just be the MLS logo looking like a sad face.
With a sad face. Yeah, actually, the MLS logo is designed to be sort of adaptable, right?
Exactly.
So,
put some sad faces in
Put
there.
a sad face
Perfect.
On it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, this is as we said before, it's a victory for Liga MX, but MLS inching ever closer.
Yes.
Yeah?
I'm good with that.
Okay.
I'm also good with Roughneck Scarves because they've been a wonderful sponsor to the Total Soccer Show.
They have. And if you want to shop at roughneckscarves.com, you can get any of the scarves you see in the Roughneck Scarves store, and you can get 20% off, which is a pretty good discount. 20% off if you use the discount code Total Soccer Show, all one word. I shouldn't have separated it, so it's Total Soccer Show, all one word, at roughneckscarves.com.
But it's also all caps, so can you make it all one word in all caps?
Total Soccer Show.
There you go. Good job. Thank you to Roughneck Scarves for sponsoring today's show. 2 more questions, Mr. Grove.
It's going to be a long show, isn't it?
It is indeed. Starting with Brendan Masser. With West Brom, Stoke City, and Southampton looking like the trio of relegated clubs this year, do you think there's any significance to 3 long-established Premier League clubs all going down at the same time? Is this a turning point for complacent clubs?
Ooh, okay. It's a good question.
Yeah.
I would disagree with Brandon's assertion that West Brom, Stoke and Southampton got complacent. I think what they did is slightly change the way they did things, maybe in an attempt to become even bigger. But so almost ambitious in a way as opposed to complacent.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what they paid for. So each situation is different, but I think you can track that across at least a couple of these teams.
Agreed. I would also say at the risk of being wildly pedantic, like I remember a Premier League not many years ago that didn't have any of these three teams in it. So there is also that idea that like while they are established in the last few years, they're not
Liverpool or Man United.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, but to take them, let's go one by one. Let's start with Southampton.
Sure.
I think that's the biggest surprise in terms of relegated clubs. The thing they stopped doing is just accepting that their best players were for sale to Liverpool.
Best player. Yeah.
Right? Because the big thing that happened this summer is there was a bid for Virgil van Dijk. Normally he would have gone. They would have reinvested the money immediately. This time they held on to him and they held on and it became a whole long-running thing. I think he wasn't sold until January, but he didn't really play all that much, right, in the first part of the season. And even though he went for, 75 million in the end, they got more money than they would have from the initial bid of 50. That's actually not that much money in the Premier League these days. And I would even say they probably had plenty of money to spend anyway. So it's not just about the money coming in. It's about the uncertainty and that being the big story around the club from, August to January.
Yeah, I mean, I think we in the past have disagreed on this one, and we might disagree a little bit here, because I can understand Southampton looking at the way the club was going, that Pellegrino did not work out. And so you then think, look, manager might not work. We've already had a bunch of managerial change. We've already sold a bunch of players. Like, we've got to draw the line somewhere, not in terms of selling players, but in terms of having some level of consistency. And we need some stability in place. And I think the issue then becomes, if your pillar of stability is a player who wants to move, that's not a very stable pillar of stability.
No.
And then you basically risk...
Pillars should not move.
And it should not. And so,
I'm no architect, but I'm pretty confident.
And so, while you, Southampton, are trying to build, look, see, we're still stable, we're keeping this guy, he himself doesn't want to go, is agitating for a move, isn't training, isn't playing, then suddenly this thing that is supposed to be stable is not. And that means the rest of your club is sort of up in the air as well.
So to summarise it, I would say they tried to stop being a club that sells their best players and became a club that sells your best player 6 months after you should have, and you get relegated.
Yep.
Yeah. And there are other factors, obviously.
I mean, but
that's the one. That's the big thing I see.
Yeah, but I mean, they still did. I believe they sold Jay Rodriguez this summer to, I believe, West Brom. I mean, that's another example of them selling on some players. But I do think, yes, holding on to Virgil van Dijk was a problem, but also continuously being forced to or having to or being willing to sell off your best talents and kind of constantly being like, all right, well, we'll bring new people through. You're not Ajax, where you're sort of always going to be Ajax. You're always going to be in the Eredivisie. People know you.
Yeah, you don't have the luxury. So maybe that is complacency in a way. It's like taking your Premier League status for granted and trying to improve upon it. And I would say the same thing happened with West Brom. Brom has...
Can I just final point there I was just going to say was, if you're playing blackjack or whatever, and if you just keep letting it ride and you keep getting hit, oh yeah, it's working, eventually it's not going to. And I think if you're Southampton, if you keep having this idea of, we'll keep bringing in young players, we'll keep selling them on, we'll keep making money, eventually those young players you bring in aren't going to work, and then you're in a lot of trouble.
But they didn't bring in young players. That's the problem. Is I wish they'd brought in a load of Southampton Academy players.
I guess when I say young players,
sold Virgil van Dijk.
Young is the wrong word. I mean replacement. Okay. When they bring in we'll bring this 24-year-old from Egypt who scored 100 goals in the Egyptian league, and he'll do it. And then if he doesn't do it, you're in trouble.
I got you. Okay, to West Brom.
Yeah.
I would look at West Brom as a team that sort of refused to accept the type of football that Tony Pulis was playing. Because apparently it was, ugly and not doing well. But when Tony Pulis was fired, West Brom was 17th.
Yep.
They were above the relegation zone. They were surviving at that moment. Tony Pulis left. They're going to finish 20th.
Yeah. I read a couple different West...
So again, that's complacent. That's wanting more than just survival.
Yes. I don't disagree with that. I do disagree with the idea that firing Tony Pulis was a bad idea, because by all accounts, I read a few different West Brom blogs around the time he was fired, and then also right now with them being 20th. And it was basically Megson, which is not a manager I would ever want managing my team, but he came in as the interim manager between Pardew and Pulis. And
Has he been West Brom manager 100 times?
Probably. But he got results, and it felt like the consensus was there's kind of some energy back, that Tony Pulis had taken the energy out of the club a little bit.
Yeah.
The players had maybe started to be like, whatever, I don't care. And that Megson or whatever kind of did energize the team, and then Alan Pardew took that energy right out. But I still kind of agree with you that Tony Pulis, You know he's going to keep you up. It's not going to be that exciting, but I think
probably would have stayed up with Tony Pulis.
Yeah.
It would have been ugly and terrible, but they probably would have stayed up. And maybe it's better to go down dancing than to stay up playing long balls.
I mean, except I wouldn't say what West Brom are doing right now is dancing.
That's true.
So
trying to dance?
That one definitely feels like a grass is always greener sort of situation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. At least try a dance move instead of sitting on the sidelines of the dance floor.
Yeah.
For Stoke City, I'm not really sure, except that it feels like they really got a lot of transfer stuff wrong. Right.
I can't believe how quickly you moved down from West Brom, given your Wolverhampton loyalties.
Well, it's also
you don't want to turn the screw a little bit. All right, that's fine.
Well, like an hour in. Yeah.
I mean, Stoke. It just seems like. So again, I read some things in preparation for this because it was this question. I was like, I have no idea what has gone wrong with these three clubs. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to be a little bit more prepared. And it seems like what has happened for Stoke is that they always relied on defensive stability, dating back to Tony Pulis, and that was always kind of like the bedrock of the team.
It's the end of the Tony Pulis empire.
Yeah, it seems that way. It's just crumbling on all fronts. But it seems like that was always the bedrock. You've got a really strong defensive backing, and then you can have different attacking options come in. Maybe some of them underperform, maybe some of them overperform.
Maybe scoring some set pieces.
But you're still keeping it defensively solid. As of now, they have conceded the most goals of any Premier League team. I saw as of like a month ago, they've conceded the most goals of any team in any of Europe's top flights.
Is that right?
I can't believe it is, but I saw that reported.
Oh, Mark Hughes.
I did not have the time to go check every single league. I would be surprised, but still that is telling that defensive stability via injury, via poor investment has gone out the window.
And I think they took some gambles. Like they sold Arnautovic, which I think he wanted to leave.
He wanted higher wages.
So they couldn't. Yeah, they couldn't hold on to Arnautovic, who I think was important to them. He was kind of a staple of the last few years. I remember he's the guy that would make something happen for Stoke, right? But like Saido Berahino, I think was a bit of a gamble, and that has definitely not paid off. He literally hasn't scored in 2 years.
Yeah, it's not great. It's not great. Gianelli Mbula came in. He was their record signing. He is now in Toulouse, I think. So you had a lot of players who were supposed to bring in this exciting attacking flair. Hesse is somewhere in the world. We're not sure where. He's
gone. Went AWOL, didn't he?
He's gone missing. Yeah. He was like he went back to Spain, I think, because there were problems with his newborn child, I think. But then he came back and just wasn't in training, wasn't playing, and is now, like, I think, as of this weekend at a nightclub somewhere. So it seems like, again, it's a lot of people maybe just sort of feeling like, this isn't for me anymore.
Here's an interesting thing with Stoke as well. I'm not saying this is the reason they got relegated, but they had Jonathan Walters and Glenn Whelan, two Irish guys who are both like 34, I think now, who were, I think of them as like the soul of the team. Like these guys who've just been around forever and would always work really hard for Stoke City and not be too flash. This is the summer, 2017 was the summer they let both those guys go.
Yep.
And I'm not saying they would have played key roles for the team, but it does seem like the last sort of founding members of that Stoke City that was always in the Premier League.
Yep.
Once they're gone, it's almost like the spark has gone out or the embers have died. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And I mean, I think I definitely know what you're saying, because if you have these players that shape the foundation and the ideology of who your club is, and you move them on and you bring in a variety of other people, like Darren Fletcher being brought in, is maybe a way of saying, like, see, but we still have that steel and that, Scottish vigor or whatever. But then if you also have this, exciting winger from Spain, but then we've got this hard-nosed, defender, but then we've got this big target man, but we've also got this pacey striker who can go, like, it's just, you've got so many different options. It doesn't feel like there's a unifying approach that maybe you had with Stoke of old.
So there we go. Final question today comes from Ken Klein. Ken Klein asks, why do you distrust a poor defence more than you trust a good attack? To which my first response was, do we? And then the rest of Ken's email says, in a recent programme, Daryl commented on one MLS team's run of 3 victories in a row by scores of 3-2, 4-3 and 3-2, noting the team continued to score a lot but then give up enough to keep the games close. So the team was Orlando City. There was also, I think I slightly misrepresented it because there was a 2-0 win in the middle of that as well. But, they basically won a lot of high-scoring games narrowly was the point. But when I read out those scorelines, Ken says, Taylor audibly said, oof, in response. This suggests Taylor thinks it's much more likely that they will be, that the leaking of goals will continue more than that the scoring that overcomes it will continue. Why is this?
I'm now confused by this question. Yeah, can you say that again?
So basically, Ken interprets your oof as being you saying that you think Orlando will continue to concede goals, but you're not. So that's definite, but they won't definitely keep outscoring the goals they concede. So to go back to his original question, why do you distrust a poor defence more than you trust a good attack?
That's what I'll say, yeah, because I can't say anything. I don't want to get into Orlando City.
Yes, so it's not specific to Orlando, right?
Yeah, I think, and I do think the oof was, I think at the time it was you saying that they went up 3-0 and then eventually won 3-2, and it was sort of ooh, that's not great.
That's close.
Yeah,
okay. So maybe you don't agree with Ken's interpretation of your oof?
No, I do, though, because I think I didn't really recognize why I said oof in the moment, other than that's not good that they conceded 2.
Sometimes we just press record and start talking. Right?
Yeah, there you go. But I think the cliche answer is that defense wins championships. But the more I get, for me, it's logical. This is the best way I can put it, because I do think that in a lot of ways this can just be flipped around to say, yeah, but could you say that in the exact opposite way? And maybe you can. But I think opponents will find ways to limit attacks. That if you are playing, Daryl Grove is holding up the ball, and then we've got Pav running off of Daryl. So then I'm going to say, okay, fine, we're always going to man mark Pav. So that we know that because Pav's running through and scoring every single time, we will stick a man on Pav every single time. And suddenly route A for you scoring goals is effectively nullified. And then you've really got to figure some stuff out on the fly. Whereas I think for defenses, if you are doing things that are defensively sound, if you have the proper mechanics in place and you have a team where you've got a lot of defensive chemistry, I think it is easier to defend a 0-0 than it is to go out and score a goal, basically.
You're essentially saying it's scoring is harder than defending.
Yes.
Scoring is harder than defending.
I think it is.
And I think that's correct. Mm-hmm. I'll say that as a defender. Because wasn't the mental experiment we did thinking about this question was you offer 2 options. You could be told you've got to defend this 1-0 lead for 20 minutes or you desperately need to score and you've got 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Which option would you take? I think almost everybody, in terms of the best chance of winning the game, you would take we've got to defend for 20 minutes and not concede.
And I would extend that further to, would you rather defend a 1-0 lead or aggressively attack to get a goal in a 0-0 game? Mm-hmm. I would still rather defend the 1-0 lead because I think aggressively attacking leaves you vulnerable to counterattacks and then easily conceding. Whereas maybe this is just because I've been slowly brainwashed by Jose Mourinho, but there is that idea of stay defensively solid, strike when the opportunity is there. But if you just leave yourself exposed, if you're always scoring 4 and 5 goals, but that comes about because everybody's getting into it and everybody's spreading balls all over the place and getting stretched, you leave yourself vulnerable. And this is the part that I think can be flipped around as well, is there's also something to be said for injuries and runs of form. I think strikers can really get into a hot streak where they score 5 and 6 goals in 4 games or whatever. But then you can also have then they had a week off, then there was the international break, they're coming back. I don't know, maybe they had a slightly sluggish break and now they're not in that form. If you're relying on a person to keep up a goal-scoring hot streak, and this is where I have a little bit of data, the most ever goals in a single MLS season by a team, 85 goals by the LA Galaxy in 1998. That was over 32 matches. They did not win MLS Cup, for what it's worth. So Orlando City would need to score 100...
Because the best team doesn't always win MLS Cup.
True. Orlando City would need to score 102 goals to keep winning 3-2, is basically the way that works. So you're going to have to eclipse that goal-scoring record. So I think at a certain point, your goal-scoring rate is going to slow down, and if your defensive shipping does not, then you're going to go from winning 3-2 to losing 2-0.
And there's a basic thing that goal scoring kind of relies on a moment of magic, whereas defending sort of relies on...
As a goal scorer, I say yes.
All right, but defending sort of relies on a practiced system that's almost like a machine that just keeps grinding.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And if the machine is broken, then it's broken until you fix it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
Okay, I think that answers the question. I think actually the best answer is that we've been brainwashed by Jose Mourinho.
Probably.
But thank you, Ken, for asking a very tough question.
Yeah.
We kind of struggled to answer, but I think we got somewhere with it.
Yeah, but a team that wins 3-2, always interesting.
Right, yes, I'd rather watch a team win 3-2 than 1-0, I think. Final thing on today's show, the Total Soccer Show Scouting Network. We have just the 6 updates from the Scouting Network this week.
We do, starting with Paul Braff scouting Anthony Fontana, the 18... You need to read this one. Sorry.
Really?
Yes.
Why?
You'll see why at the very end.
So Anthony Fontana is the 18-year-old American midfielder for the Philadelphia Union, scouted by Paul Braff. Paul says, Anthony Fontana hasn't gotten many minutes for the Union lately, but he has been playing for Bethlehem Steel, either as the number 10 in a 4-2-3-1 or as one of the more defensive midfielders shielding the back line. He had a hand in the Steel's only goal in their 1-1 draw with Charleston, but Paul Braff would prefer to see him with the Union as fantastic things seem to happen when he starts.
I figured that would make you chuckle. And it did. Daryl off mic, now laughing. There we are. Jonathan Holmgren scouting Foster Langsdorff, the 22-year-old American forward for the Portland Timbers. On April 18th, Langsdorff scored his second professional goal, the game winner, in T2's 3-2 victory over Rio Grande Valley FC. I always think that's Terminator 2 winning that game. He also played 80 minutes in T2's 2-1 loss to Reno 1868 3 days later, but earned a bench spot in the USL Team of the Week for his efforts.
If I could be in charge of the USL for a day, I would stop branding teams with numbers in them.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So T2's 2-1 loss to Reno 1868. It's too many numbers for a human brain to compute.
I don't mind Reno 1868 as much.
I mean, as a name, it's okay, but once you add it with other sort of teams with names in it, and then you add a scoreline, too many numbers to handle for me.
It's because you're not a nerd, even though you wear glasses.
I just play one. Brooks Gatzemeyer is scouting Nuhu, the 20-year-old Cameroonian left-back for the Seattle Sounders. Brooks says, Nuhu has been splitting minutes with Waylon Francis thus far this season. Against Sporting KC, Nuhu was at fault for 1.5 goals. He conceded a penalty and then made an ill-advised run forward, leaving space behind for Graham Zusi to occupy and eventually score from. However, since Nuhu got very little help from the rest of the team, Brooks is only blaming him for half a goal. Against Minnesota this past weekend, the game that Mike Moon was at, Nuhu, along with the rest of the team, played quite well in a 3-1 win.
There we are. John Youngblood scouting Rio Griffiths, the 17-year-old English striker for Tottenham. Gerald does not like to call him Rio. John does, so I will say Griffiths. Rio Griffiths scored 4 second-half goals in the Spurs U19's 9-0 drubbing of Arsenal. Wow. That had to be painful.
That's quite the under-19 North London derby.
Yep. His performance sparked yet another report that former head of recruitment Paul Mitchell wants to take Griffiths away to RB Leipzig. John says that Leipzig can't have Harry Kane's rightful heir and hopes Spurs are making sure Griffiths feels happy in London.
John Adams, not that one. The other one.
Mm-hmm.
It's that one.
Second president of the United
States? Scouting Cheyenne Harrison, the 20-year-old English striker on loan at Southend from Tottenham. John says, after a month's worth of uninteresting late-game cameos, Cheyenne Harrison was in the starting lineup for Southend's... He spelled it that way. For Southend's United's 3-0 win away at Oldham. Harrison played 82 minutes, was originally credited with an assist on the Shrimpers' first goal, but that was later retracted. It's very,
basically, I think he put a header off the bar and then it was scored.
Yeah.
So whoever was doing these stats said, he had the touch before. Doesn't quite count.
So that's the karma that Harry Kane took has been sort of...
Exactly. It was weird. Harry Kane got the assist. That was the odd part.
Cheyenne's stat line in League One reads 10 games played, 383 minutes, 0 assists, 0 goals. It seems Harrison is a level above PL2, but has struggled in his loan spells both this season and last.
Thank you, Paul Giamatti, for that report. Todd Ito scouting Takafusa Kubo, the 16-year-old Japanese attacker for FC Tokyo. Kubo was in the squad but did not play in FC Tokyo's 3-1 win over league leaders Sanfrecce, I'm guessing? I don't know. After years of mid-table mediocrity, FC Tokyo are currently second in the J-League, which Todd thinks could be bad for Kubo, as his manager might be less likely to play a 16-year-old in games that require all 3 points. Basically, if you're challenging for the title, you're probably not gambling with youngsters coming in and getting minutes.
#play your kids.
That's what Daryl says.
Thank you to Paul, Jonathan, Brooks, John, and Todd for today's reports. Absolutely zero thank yous to the FC Tokyo manager for not bringing Kubo off the bench. Also, thank you to Philip, Ben, Ira, Brandon, and Ken for today's questions. If you've got questions for us, please leave them at totalsoccershow.com/questions.
Just do it.
Taylor Rockwell, thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
Right back at you, buddy.
Listeners, thank you for listening. Taylor will not be back tomorrow, but I'll be back with what I'm hoping will be a very special interview.